Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name's Gavin Smith, and we've got a special guest today. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us again.
It's lovely to be with you again, Gavin.
Oh, it's great. It's great to have him here, and a thrill for me just to learn from Nigel. And today's podcast, we've actually asked you, the listeners, to fire some questions at us that we can put to Nigel. And thank you for everyone who's done that. We've got 8 really good questions here, and looking forward to kind of learning from Nigel and his experience. And we're going to be interacting a bit about volunteers, a bit about service, and how we're doing as individuals in serving our churches. We're going to look at finance, church planting. So a range of questions, mate. So are you ready for this?
I'll try to be.
It's great to have you, and we loved your podcast last time, and this is going to be a thrill. So Rachel, our first question about volunteers. Rachel's sent in a question, says, do you have any top tips on recruiting volunteers? This is a really challenging part of my job at the minute, and you can kind of feel that. And I guess chatting to a few church administrators, that is the case for lots of people at the minute. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Hi, Rachel, and others who have the same sort of question. I think that volunteers is a huge issue. Yeah. And I'd like to just back up a little bit before answering the specific question, to talk about volunteers and what we mean by volunteers. Yeah. When people become Christians and join the church, they're not joining a social community that's for its own good, but they're joining an army that is for out there. Yeah. And when you get a recruit in the army, those who are over that recruit do their very best to bring the best out of that recruit. But they also tell that recruit what to do. Mm-hmm. So there's a certain kind of relationship there with members of the church, which is a bit similar. Yeah. If we use the word volunteer, which to be honest I don't like very much, it does appear once or twice in the Bible, but not very often. Yeah. Yeah. And I see it much more in terms of a fresh recruit, someone who's come into the church to stand shoulder to shoulder with others, to be part of the army to move forwards. Yes. And that we have a responsibility, those who are in leadership of a church, or someone like Rachel, who clearly has a responsibility for building teams, perhaps. Yeah. We have a responsibility for putting people in the right place so that their gifting is allowed to be expressed. Yeah. David in 1 Chronicles, when he was kind of out in the wilderness, as it were, men came to him and says, "We are yours, David." He didn't have to say, "Can I have some people to come and help me?" No, they would, on the right front foot, say, "No, we want to move forward in this mission, whatever it is, scary as it is." And so I would back up a little bit from Rachel's immediate question, almost talking to those who are leading and shaping the church. Is there an atmosphere, an atmosphere in the church of serving and of the privilege of serving and of the desire for my gifting, whatever that is, to be built and allowed to flourish? I would then say, starting to address Rachel's question, that recruiting volunteers or finding volunteers is not ideally about standing up on a Sunday saying, "We need some people to help with the children's work. Anyone out there?" Because the people who respond to such a request are those who are already overstretched, who have a tender conscience.
That's true.
Whereas what you really want is to say, "Sue, David, I see a real gifting in you, maybe only embryonic, but you love children. I can just see it in the way that you watch families and so on.
Yeah, it's good.
Have you ever thought of serving in the children's work? Maybe just give it a trial for a month or 2, see how you get on, so that you're giving people the dignity of knowing they've been recognized, someone's noticed them, that they're not just there as do-it people to solve your problem because you've got a job to be done, but they're there because you want the best from them. I remember with feeding the 5,000, Jesus, he would delegate to the disciples who were with him not to get the job done, although it did, but actually he delegated strategically to build their faith. And so it's important when we're building teams and looking for, quotes, volunteers, that we put the right people in those teams because they want to be there and because they see it as an opportunity for their own gifting to be developed. I love the passage or several passages in Exodus 35 and 36, when they're building the tabernacle out. And it says, everyone whose heart stirred him and everyone whose spirit moved him came to serve. And it goes on. There are several situations in verse 36. All the skillful men among those who were performing the work made the tabernacle. There were people who said, I want in on the act. This is what I can bring to the table. I'm a skillful weaver of goat's hair. We don't get many of those in the church these days, but there are equivalents. And so you are mobilizing people who, when they're flowing in that area, they're highly motivated. I sometimes talk to people in this sort of a context about what makes your eyes light up when I talk to you. What do you feel passionate about? Let's harness that passion and feed that into serving in the church so that you're fulfilled and people are benefiting from your passion and gifting.
Absolutely right.
So I'd say recruiting volunteers is not about saying, I've got a need, who can help me solve it? It's about, I know I've got a need, but let's look for people who are already demonstrating a heart for that area of ministry and see if we can draw people in. And then let's be very practical and say, if you come and serve with the children's work, that's not a life sentence for the next 25 years.
It's got a 10-year contract.
Absolutely, We will be very clear about, if you like, the job description, and why not have a job description. We tend to think of job descriptions more for people who are employed.
We do.
But if we're wanting people to serve, let's give them a job description. These are the things we'd love. Now, I'd love you to add into that job description from your experience and your creativity. I'm asking you because you're more gifted than me. So you feed in the things you can bring to this to enrich it and fill in the colour. Let's try it for 3 months. We'll do a review at Christmas. We'll, at the end of a year, I want you to feel very free if you're serving there to say, I've enjoyed the last year, but I'm going to put it down now. So it's not a life sentence. So people know that they're not getting caught up into something that they then can't get out of or get embarrassed if they do. So that touches on some of those things. I hope that will help you, Rachel, just to think through.
I think it's great. I think it's a really, really good point. And I think if you feel like you're recruiting on your own, I think you made a good point about linking into kind of the leadership of the church, is that if you're just recruiting people for roles and there's not that opportunity to go, here's how I can best see that gifting deployed, then have that conversation with your senior pastor or with somebody, because you shouldn't be doing this in isolation. That kind of sense of team working together, because I can fill a rota, but actually I need some of this motivation. I need some of this connecting to vision that you're talking about and deploying.
Tie it in with discipleship.
And
it's not just a task to get done. It's discipleship. Great vehicle for discipleship is serving. It refines people. It talks about their character. It helps them to become punctual and turn up and be reliable and not suddenly just not arrive. I remember in a church I was in some years ago now, it was in Brighton, but some years ago this happened. We were quite short of people to just do the stewarding on a Sunday. So I said to the administrator, I wasn't the administrator of the church, I was an elder, I think probably at that stage, I said, I would like to lead one of the stewarding teams. And I then approached certain people who I knew were good at hospitality, because that's the sort of person you want. I said, will you serve with me on a rota? We'll do 2 Sundays in the month, whatever it is. I will tell you what to do, and then we'll review it, and I want you to be punctual. And everyone turned up, serve faithfully. I thank them, and that's an important part of it as well.
Yeah, indeed.
That they are honoured, and maybe we can come on to that in a moment. But I deliberately tried to build a model of something that others could copy, where I invited people to serve with me, and then I led them and helped them, even within that very simple task of stewarding. But to be reliable, to be faithful, to do it well, to have a smile on your face, to welcome people, to show them to a seat if they couldn't find one. Spot who the visitor was, tell them where the children's work took place, introduce them to another family with equivalent age children, all that sort of thing.
All that stuff matters, doesn't it? Yeah, it's good. One other thing I just add in here, and Rachel, this might be helpful as well, is that, since we've kind of come back out of COVID and churches are kind of jumping straight back into what they were doing before, there needs to be some sort of analysis sometimes where it says, actually, do we have the capacity to keep this ministry going? Do we actually need to draw back on things? And we had an example of this in our church where we were running a mothers and toddlers group, and the person who had been running it for a number of years decided to step away, and we couldn't find somebody to replace it. So we ended up having to say, right, let's close it down for a few months, thinking feels like a very negative thing, but actually what came from it afterward was actually two ladies that got together and said, we really want to do this. We really feel like God's called us to get into this ministry. Yeah. And so the void actually created an opportunity for someone to jump in and go in faith. And God, that sense of God was calling me to do this, that sense of excitement to do it. And we were able to deploy them straight away into it. And it's flourishing. And you think it feels negative to actually sometimes stop a ministry, but actually some of those things are important steps that go,
Gavin, that's
opportunity.
So courageous and so helpful.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. If we see the church as being a God-gathered community of individuals, each with their own giftings and passion, church leadership should be looking for ways for those individuals to be outworking that gifting and passion. Not recruiting people with gritted teeth to fulfill some ministry that they think they ought to be doing. I remember back in Brighton, I'm going back now a very long time, but a couple coming to us one day and saying, we would love to get involved with a soup kitchen of some sort on the street in Brighton. And there's plenty of opportunity for it there. And we said, well, your track record from a previous church, and they came well to us. We know that you're good at this sort of thing. Let's do it. As soon as we publicised that, another 40 people came forward and said, we've just been waiting for the leadership. And these 40 would prepare soup or would pray or would go out onto the level and find people or whatever it was. And so once you've got the leadership and the passion, you feel, well, God's blessings on it. But it's important as well, and that couple did move on in due course, to know when you close it down. I remember, I don't know if John Wimber means anything to you, but I remember him telling me from this vineyard, behind the vineyard churches, he said that one day a biker came to him with tattoos all up his arm. Who was a born evangelist. And he said, could I start a ministry with bikers? And so the church did, and this guy led. Then the guy moved on. And John said to the others, right, we're closing that ministry. And they said, you can't, it's one of the most successful things we do. He says, yes, it's successful with this guy leading it. But then he's now moved. We're not going to perpetuate it. It becomes a dead work rather than with life in it. So well done.
And I think that's a really good point, Rachel, here is that kind of looking for that leadership gift and that passion and that gifting, you're right, and the character. I love the idea of you saying about mixing it in with discipleship and thinking about it in that way. Hopefully that will give you some ideas to it. And there's not really a formula or a top tips. It's not just about being jolly on a notice, is there, and having the best strategy for people to sign up. But actually there's more going on here in terms of heart, in terms of working with a leadership team, thinking about your church, and actually getting to know people and their gifting takes time, doesn't it? You can't just find that out straight away, isn't it? I love talking to people about their jobs because it gives you one window into what they love or they're passionate about and what other things are there. So it does take time to invest into, and I think that's probably the bit that's the hardest bit, is not having the time to invest into that. But
But in the long run, actually, you will redeem time because you get the right people in the right place and it'll just flow.
And it flows, yeah. And that's a really good point to make. Yeah, so make the investment if you can. And again, if you're interacting with your leadership team on it, or your vicar, or whoever that might be, these conversations are great to have, and they'll be able to hopefully be able to support you to find the right time, the right priorities, and which ministries might need to stop, what ministries need to create a capacity because they're flourishing. I always feel like in a church we need that space to be able to kind of respond to an opportunity. So with the Ukrainians, we've done a Ukrainian cafe, and thinking we almost want there to be some capacity within the church to do new things and opportunities that come up that you think, right, we've had 40 people come into this Ukrainian cafe and we didn't expect it, but being able to serve people in that kind of need, and the volunteers that came forward for that just jumped in because they connected with it and they could see the difference it could make. So Rachel, maybe a long-winded answer, but hopefully we've got you thinking and others thinking.
I think the other thing, Gavin, for leadership is to create an atmosphere where people feel they can come forward and their ideas won't be rubbished.
Yes.
Sometimes you find churches where they think if it doesn't start with the eldership, it won't happen.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But let's encourage people to come forward and say, can I start a soup run? Can I start at this? Can I start at that? No, you don't just say yes. Obviously, it needs weighing.
Yeah.
But as far as possible, to release people where they have that passion actually is maybe why God's put them in the church, so the church can have that opportunity to reach into the community through their gifting.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. If you're a pastor listening to this, then please take that advice because you really set that atmosphere and that culture, don't you? You really, if people can come to you with their ideas freely, and there is a process to work through whether it will happen or not and what resources are allocated, but to have people who are stirred, like you were just saying in Exodus there, who were stirred to serve, stirred in their gifting, to say, I think I could play a part here. I want to be involved in this. Can you help me do that? Is that going to work? Encouraging.
I think another point just come out of another question, or maybe you want to bring something up, is just how to honour and thank people.
Yes. This is my question, actually.
Okay. Oh, your question. Okay. You better ask it. What was behind it, Gavin?
I think one of the things that I've been sort of chewing over is kind of, recognising, I've called it kind of recognising volunteers' contribution. And I know we're not using the word volunteer because of the previous answer, but it's how do we thank people? How do we connect people to vision? What are some of your thoughts on that? Because I think it's important, isn't it? We can have a long-term view. There's a reward that's coming. God's going to bless you, when it all comes to one place and Christ returns and there'll be rewards given out. But what's that short-term thing? And what can
that's
we
all
do?
true, but when it's raining and it's cold outside and you have to go out to an evening meeting to do something or other for someone, you want the reward now, as it were. I think you can never, if you like, thank too much, honour people. I love it when there's a certain honouring that takes place publicly. Even if it's thank you to the worship band who led us beautifully this morning. Or can we just pray for the children's workers? Thank you, Sue, Charlie, that you're prepared to miss the sermon to go out and work with the children. So that you're constantly honouring people in front of others. And actually people thrive on remarkably little in the way of thanks. I think there can be then some very good tangible things to do. I think just to drop people a card or a note or an email or a text message. Thanks for the way you did that on Sunday. Thanks for the way you're leading the work, whatever it is. I think build deliberately, maybe once a year, twice a year, maybe to an event of some sort where you can just gather the volunteers and it's there to say thank you. In a ministry that I'm involved with in Bristol, we have what we call a thanquet.
Okay.
Once a year for the volunteers. And we give them a really nice meal and we just say thank you and update them on what's happening with the ministry and so on. Maybe an outing in the summer or something with their families. There are lots of creative ways you can do it. Even perhaps just a gift token at Christmas. But don't just assume, we've got that team sorted, right, we'll go on and think of other things. No, they're people. And we all just like that honouring.
Yeah.
And it's very simple, doesn't cost a lot.
No, it's right.
But you may well be holding on to people as well because they're feeling fulfilled and valued.
I think it goes back to, just to add to what you're saying, if you've got a team leader who's leading a team, say the car park team or something, and how do you think we could bless this car park team? What are your thoughts? So this isn't just me thinking, right, this is how we should thank you, but actually what would make a difference? And for some it might just be buying a round at a pub, and having a drink together and just thanking one another. And for others it's a meal is great, or like you say, a card is good. I know I've been blessed by receiving a card saying thank you so much for you doing the difference it makes. And
it's a little thing, but that's nice. They've thought of it.
And I think I want to see it in a way that kind of recognizes grace in other people. So that's an evidence of God's work in you. And I want to point that and celebrate that, because they may not even see it themselves. Someone's faithfully served, and sometimes we can just get on and do what we do and not realize actually the difference that we are making until somebody stops in a role, and then you go, oh wow, that we really lost somebody here. So how do we celebrate grace, and how do we find ways to encourage them?
I mean, just you said that they may not see it in themselves. I think this is often so true. So just going back to the illustration I brought about creating a stewardship team and looking for people with the gift of hospitality. I went to one or two people and I said, you are such an encourager. Oh, what do you mean? Well, I see how you quickly go to someone who's got a prophetic word on a Sunday and just say thank you, or you go to someone after the sermon and say thank you, or to a worship. You're an encourager. Doesn't everyone do that? No, they don't.
No, they don't.
It's you. That's something peculiar with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. So to recognise that, to help people to see who they are, what their gifting is, and so on, is itself honouring, bringing dignity. It's all about relationship, and loving people and wanting the best. And
I totally agree. And I think it's, I've always tried to, one of the things that people have heard on podcasts before is my passion about connecting the practical ministry to the vision. And so people don't always make that connection. So, I particularly, think about our media team and our PA team. These guys make it possible for people to hear the gospel preached from the stage because they're doing what they're doing, and they don't realize. So sometimes just pointing out, saying, do you know what, if you didn't serve that, people wouldn't hear the good news of Jesus, they wouldn't be discipled, they wouldn't hear the ministry of the word, and all those things make a difference to this family. And people don't always connect it to the gospel, but if we can do that work for people, I think that will encourage their faith and encourage them to do more and serve more and just find a real enjoyment in what they're doing, which is important as well.
And typically the less conspicuous ministries, if you like, the less platform ministries, the behind-the-scenes ministries of administration and so on, very few people in the church are actually going to come and say thank you. Because it just happens. It's just part of the way this church runs. They don't stop and think, I wonder how that happened. And I used to say to my teams who ran conferences, for instance, I said, don't expect anyone to come and thank you. I will do that. But the only reason people will come to you is when it's not working. We don't want any of that. So don't expect people necessarily to come to you. Our role, as you rightly say, is to create an atmosphere where people can meet with God. That's actually why we're here.
Absolutely right.
And so we're just looking for the ways of helping that to happen.
To usher that along. That's good. So thank you, Rachel, and my own question for that, volunteering, and I think I just need to be more intentional. I think that's my conviction. I think I need to do more. Say, right, a weekly activity that I do on a Monday or something right at the start of the week that, before it gets busy, where can I thank and encourage someone? What does that look like? I think that discipline needs to be in there. So that's my takeaway for today on those questions.
Little diary note.
little thing. These are great little conversations and snippets. Third question then, talking about sort of service, and I mean, it builds onto this. How do you sustain a long service in Christian ministry? I mean, you have, and others have. I think this is coming from somebody who's been involved in ministry for 20 plus years. So what are some of your encouragements or, non-negotiables, I guess, of what you've put in place to help you serve in a long capacity?
Good question. Interesting question. I think first, let's just unpack a little bit about what involvement in Christian ministry means. Because I think there are those, and I would certainly count myself amongst them, who felt a real call from God. I mean, in my case, from the age of 9, believe it or not, that I knew I was called. There are others, and some of the people who work with me, where it was a job. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it is quite helpful to tease those two apart, I think. I'm going to assume in making the answer that we're more talking about someone with a sense of calling, probably, than someone who's there for the job. I think someone with a sense of calling, I would say the first point is know you're called, know why you know you're called, and constantly remind yourself, was it that God spoke through a sermon? Was it through a scripture? Was it through someone saying something? A combination of usually several things that you think, I am where I am because God spoke. And when the going gets tough, and it will, and the enemy has a vested interest in making sure it does.
It's true, very true.
When the going gets tough, it's important to be able to go back and say, but I know God spoke there. I'm not going to let my head go down and yield to the enemy's discouragement, which is often what brings it. You know, suddenly things don't work out quite the way we expected, and you think, did I get that wrong? Go back to where you knew God had spoken. And hopefully that was also weighed with others. So there are others who can stand with you and say, no, Gavin, don't you remember when we talked about it, we prayed about it, we were all convinced.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And nothing's changed. You know, and so you can be lifted, and you've got brothers standing alongside you, brothers and sisters. And so I think that's another important point, that you stay in relationship. I think the enemy loves to pick off what you might call the isolated person or the one-man ministry. Very important there's relationship there. I remember when I moved to Bath, one of the very first things I did was to find someone, having been in Brighton for many years and having a lot of good, close relationships with people, and someone there I would meet with regularly and get him to ask me a few difficult questions. I wanted to find someone new in Bath, and I didn't know anyone, so I had coffee with one or two people and gradually got confident with one individual, particularly someone who was really a peer, my sort of age, and also had some life experience and some challenges that were quite similar to my own. And so we could actually become mutually accountable. And I think that is a very important part of keeping secure and steady in your calling. That when your head's inclined to go down, and for all of us it probably does at some stage, there's someone who can say, oh, please help me, I'm just kind of struggling a bit at the moment. And also then, just as it's important to know how God spoke when you were first called, and be able to refer back to that and say, well, I know I'm still in his will. Also, if God is then moving you out of calling into some other area, he also needs to be very clearly heard, and you need to know it's happened, and have a context where you can weigh it. A friend of mine in Bath, as it happens, but who leads a church, has been going through quite a tough time. And I was meant to be meeting with him recently for a coffee, and he contacted me and said, Nigel, do you mind not? I just feel really low today. Indeed, I'm actually asking God if I can leave, but at the moment he says no. And I thought, well done, that you are prepared not to just go with your own inclination and get out of it, but you're saying, God is now the time, and you're still prepared to hear from God. And so obviously I'm going to help him and support him, as are others, to go through this difficult period. So does that kind of scratch, do you think, where the person who's asking this question was?
I think you pick up some really good points there, because you know, ministry and working for a church is a tough job, and I don't think people outside of the church who've not been in a role realize how challenging it can be, and some of the temptations, some of the difficulties, some of the pressures. So I think that's the first thing to recognize. It's not an easy thing. This is a tough thing. So to have, the fact that you might have been serving 10, 20 years is recognize that wonderful grace of God to you that's got you to where you are. And I love the point where you reference back to that calling. I think that's so important. But for me, the real take-home point here is friendship. Yes. How do I find real, genuine friendship that can support me in this role as I journey through this thing? And there might be friends who say, do you know what, the season's coming to an end. Are you asking those questions? Because sometimes those friends prompt me to think about things. Yeah. Are you still doing this? Have you still got a heart for this? You don't seem as joyful as you were previously. What's going on? How are you feeling? How's it going? That those kind of real friendship questions make a difference, and in trusting people and setting those up, I think seems like a real key to that long service.
And I think part of that friendship, Gavin, also is people who you can be totally transparent with, knowing it will not go anywhere else. Yeah. And they pray for you. Yeah. Peter Wagner, many years ago, wrote a book called Prayer Shield. Okay. And I've often encouraged people in ministry, whatever level of ministry, to make sure you've got 2 or 3 friends who you can say, I'm going through a tough time, or I'm just going to a difficult meeting or something or other. Will you pray for me? And that prayer shield, that prayer protection, that prayer covering is very important. Yeah, it is. And just yesterday, funnily enough, I was one day before, someone who prays for me regularly, he says, okay, what's happening the next 3 months? Yeah. I was able to say this, and this, this is an area that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. Please pray for me in that. Yeah. Just to know that happens. Yeah. And you see the effect of it. Oh, suddenly that meeting went much better than I expected. Yeah. Why? Yeah. Well, because God's been allowed into it, Yeah. Can I also just say a little bit about seasons of life?
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
Because, I think that it's very easy to follow the world and say, well, it's your working life and then you retire. I don't see retirement in the Bible. Mm-hmm. I think retirement is a function of the pension funds. Okay. They've got to have a date somewhere where they start paying out, But nevertheless, there are seasons. Yeah. And so for myself, when, for instance, I came off the payroll, I didn't see myself as retiring in terms of I'm going to go and play bowls every day, much as I do enjoy bowls, not that I've played recently. But much more, okay, God, what is this fresh season of life? Yes. And I had a very good advisor, good friend, still very good friend, who really helped me and said, Nigel, you need to see that where you have been a hands-on, make-it-happen guy till now, your value from now on is going to be your experience and your acquired wisdom from the years. Maybe even a part of what we're doing today is an example of that.
Yeah, I think so.
When you've lived long enough, you've learned a few tricks on the way. And so the season of life changes, but that doesn't mean you're less in God's will and calling in Christian ministry. Yeah. We're all in Christian ministry if we're Christians. Yeah. Some are paid to be, others are not. Yeah. The pay is perhaps a function of time. Yeah. It's not a status.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a function of time, that if I have this secular job, I'm so busy I can't give myself to the areas of Christian ministry that I want to. Yeah. So I come full time. That's really all it is. Yeah. People tend to give it a little bit of an aura and a mystique, but it isn't. It's just someone else pays you.
I agree.
So when I stopped being paid and entered that kind of retirement season, as the world would say, I then went back to God and I said, okay, what does this season look like? And he gave me a few keys. And one is networking. And I spend a lot of time ringing up leaders saying, can we have a coffee? One of them said to me a bit reluctantly, well, okay, we've got a date. What is it you want to talk about? And I said, I don't want to talk about anything. I just want to get to know you. His face visibly relaxed. Because we don't realize sometimes that a church leader, so often people come to them because they want something.
That's right.
They'll say something nice at the beginning, but the real reason for coming is they want something. And so to be in that position as I am now, of being able to say, I'd like to just get to know you, get to know you a bit better. How can I pray for you? And so maybe I can support you. Maybe I can put you in touch with someone else. So we've got 2 leaders in Bath. Obviously, I'm not going to name, but they both have quite challenging situations with their children, and they're similar problems. And so it was a joy just to say, let's have a coffee, the 3 of us. And those 2 now, I know, go on seeing each other. I can drop out of it. I've done my bit.
You've connected them.
And I've connected them, and they can encourage one another, because if we have problems, in this case, it's to do with handicap. If we have problems, there are not many people who really understand, because they haven't experienced it. They can understand with their minds, but they don't know the challenges of sleepless nights and people in the supermarket saying unkind things because your child is apparently undisciplined, but it's actually because he's got a serious problem. All those sorts of things. So to be able to put people together who have that understanding, you don't have to explain it, has a value, and you can roll that out. So I'd say, I don't think we ever retire, because we're Christians until our dying day, and then we're with the Lord, so we're probably still Christians. But it's just how you use the time and seeing seasons of life.
That's good. I mean, that leads so well on to our question from Nick, which is great. And I think it really does tie in. He says, how do you know when it's time to stop your involvement in Christian ministry or activity and service? And how do you explain to your friends who are able to keep going and are committed to that, but you're kind of starting to think, can I continue? So it sounds like there's some I might need to stop. I need some advice of how do I stop? When you love the people that you're involved in, you love the ministry you're involved in, but you feel like it's coming to an end. Any advice for Nick on that?
There are a number of things I could say on that. I think, first of all, if you sense that it's coming to an end, just do have someone or a group of people that you can share it with and say why you think that. It may well be that they come back to you and say, you can't stop. We couldn't do without you. When I left Brighton, one of the elders came to me and says, Nigel, can we pay you to come back here one day a month? We value what you are and who you are and your input. And I said, I really appreciate the attitude, the heart behind that. Let me leave first and then come and ask me if you still feel that. I think the hole will just fill up now, but not, no one is indispensable ultimately. And that's what happened. I still meet with this guy for lunch on occasion just for fun. But what I brought, that was last year, or yesteryear. New people have come in doing a much better job. So I'm not indispensable and no one is. So I think there can be that attitude. We can't afford to lose you. I think another attitude is, have you lost your faith or something?
Something's going wrong here.
And so you need to again, no, I haven't. It's just a season of life. And, because of my age, I just am not as sharp. For instance, before today, you kindly sent me the questions. I could have answered off the top of my head, but I thought, no, I'm going to do a little bit of work, because I know that I'm not mentally as sharp as I was 20 years ago. I won't recall the scripture or whatever it is, so I'll write something down. So I intentionally adjusted for this season of life, or these circumstances. And so it's not that I've lost my faith, it's just that I'm getting older. And so it happens with us all.
Absolutely right.
So do you think that
I think that's good. I think that's good.
Any supplementaries you want to throw in?
I think we've already
there?
talked quite a lot about this, Nick, and hopefully you've picked up some of the stuff from the podcast. Is maybe your role's into more of an encouraging role. Maybe it's into maybe there's a season now where you're going to train somebody else up next to take over from you. Chew those things over, and I think chat to friends, and I think go back to that sense of what is God calling you to do in this season is so important, because that will make the conversations easier, won't they? When you feel like, can I say this? Do I stop? If you're able to say, do you know what? I felt of the sense that this needs to I need to stop doing this. I feel God's calling me to do this, and I'm looking for other ways that I can serve. So maybe that might serve.
I'll tell you something I did do, which I don't know if it applies to Nick, was it? We're in a university town. and I love being with students. And so when I moved to Bath, I looked for some undergraduates and then said, let's meet once a fortnight on a Saturday morning and study the Bible together.
Yeah, great.
And so I could then start kind of discipling them and offloading some of the things that maybe God had taught me over the decades to their benefit and hopefully stop them falling into some of the pitfalls that students can say.
Absolutely right.
So again, that's just been a privilege and a joy. So, maybe something fresh opens up.
I think that's right. Yeah, maybe you need to stop doing what you're doing, and something will open up. And But again, talk about that with friends. Talk about it with your leaders. Because they would have experience of working through this with other people who've got, who are asking these questions, who are saying that. Yeah.
Maybe I could say, Gavin, and I'll say it to the camera, that if Nick, you're watching, or if there are others who have these sorts of questions, I'd be very happy to enter into a kind of an email dialogue with you or something like that. If you feel there are specific things that maybe I could help you think through or talk through, that would be a joy, it would be a privilege, which in a way is a fulfillment of what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely
it's
right.
another opportunity in my stage of life where maybe I can help others, which is a joy.
Yeah, brilliant. Nick, take him up on this kind offer. Thank you very much. Right, moving on then to a couple of different questions. One is relating to church planting and what kind of gifting, this has come from Steve, what kind of gifting do you need on a church planting team is the question.
I think before talking about gifting, I'd like to talk about character. You're hard pushed to find any job description for anything in the Bible. What is an apostle? Well, what did Paul do? What did Peter do? What did Barnabas do, etc.? They all did different things, but there are some fundamentals in that. Well, they seem to lay a good foundation. They seem to build straight, etc. They seem to be teachers and so on. So you can kind of sort of construct a job description, but it's not an apostle does this. Similarly with elders, similarly with deacons. And actually what they tend to get back to in the Bible, what the Bible gets back to, is character.
Yeah, it's good.
So an elder, not to be drunk, a husband of one wife, etc. Deacons likewise, it says in 1 Timothy 3.
That's right.
It's all about character. And it's almost as if God is saying, if you've got the right character, I'll trust you to get on with doing it, whatever way you want to do it, as it were. So coming back to the specifics, what giftings do you want for a church plant? Well, obviously, there are certain giftings you do want. You want someone with the gift of teaching and preaching. Obviously, someone who could be a worship leader. Probably someone to look after children and so on. But I would say overriding all those things, it is a relationship and maturity of character and spiritual maturity is the starting point. You can almost put anyone together if you've got those. And it may be there isn't even a very strong teacher, and so you set about it in the early days in a slightly different way. By sharing, by interacting, by doing Bible study together. Let's dig down into it by listening to something on the internet. So if God has called someone to plant or a team to plant in a certain city, I think you then start saying, well, okay, if these are the people who planted, what are the giftings we've got? Now, in the case of the church I'm in at the moment, which is a plant in Bath, we have one person who's very good at leading worship but doesn't have a lot of time. And so we're praying quite a lot that we would have someone else to come alongside as a worship leader. Meanwhile, we're using a thing called icing worship, which is on the internet and is geared for exactly that situation where it projects slides, plays the music, has the choir, a choir, and people singing behind it, and you join in. It works perfectly well. So we don't have to have that worship leader, but we would like one. I would say administration. I think administration is an undervalued ministry, and I deliberately use that word because I think it is a ministry.
absolutely right.
And I've written a little booklet which I think you recommended on the last podcast, The Gift of Administration. To me, administration is not about just making things happen, although it certainly should do, but it's about helping channel people through into their area of gifting, into their sweet spot, and seeing that everyone is serving in the right place. Meanwhile, you're putting in place the structure where that can happen. And I think administration can facilitate growth, and can facilitate a church plant, which obviously is all about growth ultimately. If it's done well, done sensitively, done with a serving attitude rather than a dictatorial attitude. I don't like the sort of administration that comes to a leader and says, well, we can't do that because. To me, that's quite a challenge to do that, but I'll work out a way of achieving it. If you feel that's what we want to be doing, somehow we'll work it through. A much better attitude rather than I, as an administrator, say can't do it.
I think that's right.
It's an attitudinal thing. So again, it comes back to character.
It does, isn't it? And I think what I've seen in terms of church planting teams is that there can always seem to be this urgency where I think preparation in terms of who the team is and what kind of gifting you need to start with is so important. So, you're talking about, there has to be someone who's really good at preaching and teaching, isn't it? And that's primarily what we're about, and telling the good news of Jesus. So we want to, and that might be you, Steve, who's asked the question. And I think sometimes it's good to think about what are your strengths and weaknesses as a leader going into that church plant.
Yes.
I think that's a helpful self-reflection thing. Where do I need help, and where are the people that can draw alongside me in the gifting that I've got, and then the areas that I don't have. And that again takes time, doesn't it? And that again takes relationship to work through those, and honesty to say, I think I can serve here, but I need someone in administration, or I need someone in a worship leader, or I need someone with kids. And those are the kind of some of the key elements that we start talking about. But you need people who can help with the finances, who can help with organising rotas and all those things.
And they can be parcelled out to different people. And, we were talking about volunteers earlier. It's an excellent opportunity for people to start serving. Yeah, it is. So someone looks after the gift aid, someone else looks after the finances, someone else, etc. So it doesn't all have to be done by one person. I think just going back to the preaching thing, Gavin, don't be frightened to invite people in as visiting preachers. Maybe get a series of some sort, preach through a book of the Bible. And then just invite someone to come in and will you preach on chapter 3 of that? We will have already covered this and that. Get someone in, because there are people out there maybe who are retired. Going back to what we were talking about there. But who have a real gift of preaching. Well, let's use them.
Absolutely right. And it's a very intense thing, isn't it, a church plant? There are so many avenues that you need help and service with. And I think sometimes just working at a pace and working with a leader who's been on a church plant, who knows what it's like, to kind of be mentored, to be coached. If you're planting as part of a network, then I think there's sometimes a lot more support, isn't there? But we can think we've got to have all of these ministries all functioning and all working. I remember one church plant that we were aiming to have a mothers and toddlers group, a Sunday morning, a teens youth group running. They were hiring a school and doing 2 services and doing all the pack down and pack up and all that stuff that's related to kind of the kind of running of it. And you've gone, wow, that is such a big ask in the early stages of what is a church plant. So I think
it can cause people to burn out.
It really does. So you need to set a pace, don't you? I think, and I think it's not just having a team of people who are on the ground with you to do what you're doing locally in the church plant, but also that wider team that can care for you in it and can help you, navigate what are the things that you need to kind of start doing. And every church plant is different, isn't it? Every city or every town or rural church plants. I mean, each one has different dynamics. And
I think about that. That's a really good point as well. When you move into a town, do it well.
Yeah, please.
I know of one situation where a couple felt called, I'm sure they were, to move into this particular city, and they just announced, we'll come to church plant.
Okay.
That's the best way of putting it. Everyone's noses how to join.
It is, yeah.
When we moved to Bath, the couple who are leading the church plant were in, I said, look, before you say anything, let me introduce you to one or two people.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And one couple who are senior and well respected in the city, they just embraced this couple, say, you are so welcome.
Yes.
This is a big city with many people who aren't saved. The more labourers in the harvest field, the better. You're so welcome. Come and join in and I'll introduce you to people. So you're working together with other churches rather than I'm the best thing since sliced bread. I don't think in this town there's a good church, so we're going to plant it. Not good.
Not a good approach.
Not a good approach.
No, not a good approach at all. No, that's helpful. And again, there are so many good materials out there, and far more experience than certainly I have of church planting. And so, but if you're keen to church plant and you've got that sense of call, then connecting with a leader, look for some training. Union College. There are lots of different theological colleges that can help you. Lots of different ministries that focus, into this kind of one specific area. So, but make church administration a part of this team somewhere, and then because it's a church administration podcast, that's it will help you. And I think if a pastor gets bogged down with trying to lead a team spiritually and preaching the word and preparing all of that, if they end up doing all the administration as well, they are going to struggle. And
it can be totally consuming as well.
It can be,
And if they're not particularly strong in administration, it takes them twice as long as someone who just thinks that way.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And it's also probably denying someone else the privilege of serving.
Yeah, it is,
They say, well, I'll do it. Particularly if they're trying to justify the use of their time. I mean, not many church planters are fully supported, but some are. And so they may not have enough to fill their time. So the default position is I'll take the administration on board. But they may not be very good at it. And so it becomes consuming and heavy. And it's denying someone else the opportunity to serve.
I totally agree. It's good. Nigel, thank you for this, mate. We're working through these questions, just drawing and learning from you. This is a question from Phil that's been emailed in. From your experience, is there a link between good church management and a church successfully growing? So I know we've started talking about those different gifts in church planting, but is there that connection? Have you seen that over a period of time?
Yes, I've seen it, but I've not seen it formally and analysed it enough. But I would say just to repeat a little bit what we have said, but I think it's very appropriate here that the church management and church administration, I think, needs to focus on how to release people into their gifting and how to make the church attractive to the people who aren't in the church. If we believe, as I passionately do, the church exists primarily for those who aren't in it.
Exactly right.
How do we get the people who aren't in it into it?
That's right.
Because that's what will bring the growth.
That's right.
And so welcome, relationship, good website, all those sorts of things all speak of the community I'm looking to join.
They do.
Someone who outside is looking around. I think the people on the front door are particularly important. I remember the very first church we ever planted, which was way back in the 1970s, shows how old I am. We had a family who came one Sunday from a church situation where they were very hurt. And they told me afterwards that they determined that they would spend 6 months not committing to any church. They would just travel around different churches. They came to our church on the first Sunday and were so welcomed at the door, they never went anywhere else.
That's great.
And they moved through into leadership within the church. Then they went off church planting.
Right.
Because of the welcome. And the guy on the door, he had a smile that went 3 times around his face. He had a handshake which was strong and affirming. He knew how to introduce them. They had young children to another family who also had young children.
That's great. Yeah.
That shop window,
Yes.
as it were, that entrance is so important. I cannot overemphasize the importance of a good welcome. I visited a church a few years ago now, which is well known. I certainly won't mention it, but I was a visitor, and the couple on the door were so busy talking they didn't even notice me come in.
Okay. Yeah.
And certainly when I have been on welcome, and I love being on a
Yeah.
welcome, I will often put myself there even if I'm not on any rota because I just enjoy it. And someone starts talking to me, I will say to them, look, sorry, can we talk about this later? I want to be available for the visitors. And I will
it needs that priority.
deliberately state that.
Yeah.
So I would say that, this all comes out of church management and church growth, but getting that front door right is so important. Yeah. And that as people arrive, there's a sense of order and peace. Yeah. There's not someone still testing out the PA. The PA is not being tested at a volume you can't hear yourself think and talk. Yeah. The coffee is already there. Yeah. All those sorts of things are in place. That's where church management, I think, helps towards church growth because it's helping bring the visitor in. Yeah. And if we're not looking for visitors to come to faith, if they're not already people of faith, that's how growth is going to take place.
Yeah. There was a bit of a reaction, wasn't it, to just being so visitor focused. But I feel like, it is such an important point, isn't it, that we want visitors to be able to come in, and as they feel relaxed and at ease, when they hear the good news of Jesus, they're more likely to just receive it, aren't they? Rather than thinking, oh, I don't like it in here, or I'm cold in here, or this is too loud and nobody spoke to me, all those things. So I love your example because it just, somebody comes into a church hurt, they've already got some bit disillusioned, and the welcome is the thing that they remember. The welcome is the thing that transforms them, that they feel part of a family, and then they go on and serve other in the church plant. I mean, all that thread, you just go, that's amazing. And that motivates me to think, how do we welcome folk, and what am I going to be like as an example?
And also,
I think,
to educate the church to be a welcoming church. Sometimes you can go into a church, and almost the illustration I gave a moment ago about the two people who just went on talking. People get into cliques because they haven't seen their friends for a week and so on. For the visitor coming in, it can be quite a cold, unfriendly atmosphere. Everyone else is chatting, clearly happy. I don't know how to engage. Now, myself, I've got sufficient boldness. I'll just go up to someone and say, "Hey, I'm new here. Who are you?" But most people won't do that.
Yeah, they won't.
And so to have people who are particularly on the alert. I will sometimes say, I'm in a conversation, I say, sorry, I've just seen someone coming. Do you mind? I'll come back to you. Hey, nice to see you. Where are you from? And I will do that quite
culture.
Intentionally.
That there isn't just the welcome team responsible, but you're right, that broader, and that does come from the leadership, doesn't it? That actually,
it does.
We want to be a welcoming church, not just a welcoming team.
And it's not about saying it from the front, it is about modelling.
Doing it,
and doing it.
I think you're right.
People, that's the culture of our church,
Absolutely.
This is how we do things.
Yeah.
So you're creating it by modelling it.
And there's so many practical things that you can think about. Having the right tools, having a good communication in the church, being able to, connect people, being able to give people clear times when they're serving and on their rotas, being, role descriptions, all these things will enable people to find a place to fit, be able to serve, find joy in what they're doing, and I think those things make a difference to, what we're saying about church growth. The things that you love, you talk about with your friends, don't you? And if you love your church and love being part of this family, you will go out and tell people about your family and what you're passionate about.
Bring their friends. That's right.
It is.
I mean, I think getting people serving quickly is also very good. We've got a young man from, I think he's Indonesia or Malaysia, who's just recently, within the last month, come to our church. And quite quickly we learned he was a bit of a musician. So last Sunday he's sitting there on the drums.
Great.
Wonderful.
And
it doesn't really matter if he's not very good. But he now feels accepted and a part of it. Actually, I think he's a guy of huge potential. I expect great things of him. But nevertheless, we quickly, in a unthreatening way, said, hey, how about church join in with the worship team? Come play the drums.
Yeah, absolutely right.
He was as happy as anything.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And he's not going to go away in a hurry.
Yeah.
Because he's been accepted and welcomed in.
That's right. I think that's good. And I think on this point here is, certainly, we exist for those outside the church. So what events and things that are we doing that's reaching into the community, that's reaching into unbelievers? How do we ensure that we do those things really well? That people are fed well, they come to something that's organized, that's well publicized, that they feel that they're welcomed when they come. Those outward facing ministries are really, go down to the details. How, get somebody involved who loves details, who loves the planning, who loves to be involved in things, because those events can make a real impact on people, can't they? That we can underestimate actually. So I think that's where I see some of the connections, in terms of growth, rather than just transfer growth, but actually new believers. We want to see people changed by encountering God,
but also make sure that at the end of any such event, there's a thread that people can continue to follow through. Yeah. Quite often, if there's a visitor in our church, I'll maybe chat to them over a cup of coffee before the meeting. Before they go, I'll try and get a chat to them. And again, I said, it'd be lovely to see you again. No pressure at all with what I'm about to say, but we do have a WhatsApp group where we tell the church when the next meeting is and so on. Would you like your name on there?
Yes. Yeah.
And people are perfectly feel, no, I'm not ready for that, which is fine.
Yeah.
But if you kind of get them onto the WhatsApp group, they then can subliminally be picking up little bits of news that are going on. They're learning about the feel of the church, even if it doesn't directly apply to them.
Yeah, that's right.
They're gaining something.
That's really helpful. So I think there is, like you were saying, I think there is a connection. I think if you feel like your church isn't growing, and I don't know whether that's a question, we don't know the context for Phil here, but if that is the question, then maybe get some help from outside. Say, what could you do differently? Would you come and visit us on a Sunday and just think about, give me some feedback? Because we do come in familiar, don't we?
Yes,
we do come, we know the pattern, we know how it works, we know the flow. But for a new person, what's happening? I mean, we announced on Sunday, right? The teenagers group on Sunday are going to go to the landing for their session. And, what's the landing? Where do they go? As a visitor, somebody explain that. And so actually getting that kind of little bits of feedback, I think do help. So.
And another thing you can do, which I've done on occasion, I don't always do it, but I've done on occasion, I'll go to someone who's been coming along for 2 or 3 weeks and say, just tell me, what was it like when you first came here? What were the things that you didn't understand or we didn't make clear or you didn't know where it was or whatever?
That's good.
I'll do that also, incidentally, with employees. I'll go to them after 3 or 4 weeks and say, what do you see here that I'm not seeing because I'm too familiar with it? It's so surprising the way you do that. Or we never hear about when the staff prayer meeting is on. We just suddenly found everyone suddenly disappeared.
Where has everyone gone?
So just to get some feedback like that. It's the only way. You really can't see your own context as an outsider. You can try, but you really can't. But there's an impact for someone who's coming into a fresh environment of things that strike them that you can learn from.
And I remember what you were saying about in Acts 6 before about, the problem that arose there, and, people were deployed, the deacons were deployed to go and feed these widows. And, you read later on in the text that, the word was preached and the church grew. And
many were added,
and you go, that was great. So there clearly was something that happened there that brought some organisation that resulted in fruit. And I think that's kind of the link here is definitely there. So lovely. Right, moving on for the last 2 questions, Nigel, relating to finance. And I know, we're in a season now where it's particularly challenging for individuals with the cost of living rise. It's just, crazy, isn't it? People, what they're paying for their gas, electricity, challenges that might be happening. And so when you kind of understand your members and you're talking about church finances, this is a challenging topic. So I'm hoping to, we've been in seasons like this before, haven't we? And I'm sure you're going to have some wisdom here. So the questions come in is, what advice do you have for churches who face financial challenges over the next few months and years, and maybe some practical points that they can consider? It's a hard one.
This is a hugely challenging topic, and we do need to unpack it. And let's interact to do so. Strangely, I would say start with budgeting.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've travelled a lot overseas, as I think you know, and I've talked about things like budgeting in Africa, and their response has often been, "But we haven't got any money."
Yeah.
And I've said, "No, but that's why it's so important to budget."
Yeah.
So when you get some money, you know what the priority is because you've already decided in advance, this is what we're going for.
Yes.
And I think we're in a season within the church like that now because of COVID and the current crisis and so on, where maybe the giving anyhow is going down because some people left with COVID and didn't come back afterwards and so on. And now we've hit huge inflation in the UK, and I don't know how widely this podcast goes, but it's fairly worldwide.
Yeah.
And so, there is less money to achieve what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think it's a chance to review what we're doing and how we're doing it. Almost get a fresh commission from God that we should be serving in these areas. I'm very mindful of that famous quote of Hudson Taylor's, which I probably won't get word perfect, but something like God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. Yeah, and Hudson Taylor never appealed for money, nor did George Muller. And yet he built 5 or even 6 huge orphanages in Bristol. And God always provided
what they needed.
So let's not be so practically orientated that we forget we're in faith. We're a people of faith.
Yeah.
So I would say a budget is a helpful thing to have.
Oh, definitely.
And that it should be vision driven.
Yes.
It shouldn't be about only practical matters. I would say, just talking, I don't know if any trustees would be listening to this, but I would say the trustee body has a huge role, if conducted in the right way, in serving the leadership of the church in this area of finance. And trustees and elders, I think, should be very much one team with different expertise. They should never be conflicting. And sometimes, and we've done a podcast on this, sometimes you find eldership teams and trustee bodies at each other's throats. I mean, that is so unglorifying to God. But the trustees can have a very useful role to play because they tend to be people who are in the world, as it were, more than perhaps the spiritual leadership of the church is.
Yeah, that's good.
It's sensitive to what's going on. And I see the role of trustees, and I've chaired trustee bodies for many, many years. I see the role of trustees first, making sure that all the finances are well in order. And that the elders, if it's an eldership-led church, that the elders are fully in the picture about what the situation is with finances and how the consequences of any decision they may be making, what the consequences are, and whether the finances are there to do it. And I won't accept the little phrase, "Oh, we're in faith for that." I will dig. Because sometimes we're in faith is actually saying, "Well, we don't know how to solve this problem, but I'm optimistic."
It is. Yes.
And that for me is not good. If you're in faith, you need to tell me in what way you're in faith, how God has spoken to you to allow you to say that. Once I'm satisfied as a trustee that the decision-making leadership understand the financial consequences of a decision they're making, I'm then very happy to come alongside them and with them to be on my knees praying, "God, will you provide?" Which is where the faith is exercised. But be sure you know the facts first. So we're in a situation of recession, of crisis, or whatever you like to call it. How do we handle it now? I would say review all that you're involved in. Obviously trim the budget where you can do so. But try to identify what the essence of the ministry is and what the peripheral matters are. And don't lose the essence. The church needs to be strong and available at this time, not in survival mode. For the world to be able to come to the church, they say, "Yes, so welcome. We know how difficult it is out there. You're in a safe space here." That they should be able to come to the church with that attitude is brilliant. I'm encouraging our own church, and I know others are as well, to try and begin creating a pot for people who can't pay their electricity bill and so on.
Yeah.
Let's help people to walk through the practice of life. And, it may be that we take a special offering. I don't know, we haven't decided yet. But we'll take a special offering because there are one or two people in the church for whom the crisis is going to be an inconvenience, but it's not a serious financial impact.
Yeah.
Their earnings are such
they're going to
that
be
it's
okay.
not going to be a problem.
Yeah.
So maybe we take a special gift day,
Yeah.
a love offering
Yeah.
that we can set aside to help people who, again, very definitely feel the challenges that are going on now. So, I think these are things, approaches, but do you want to come back to me on any of this?
No, I think they're good. I think I like your point about budgeting, because I do meet lots of churches who haven't in previous years had to budget because they've always had funds there. And so I think budgeting exercise, I think a review of that is really, really helpful. I think for a church administrator, the advice you're giving there about, I can sometimes feel the responsibility as I'm the kind of final stamp that says, yes, we can afford this. But actually, I like you kind of reposition it and say, actually, let me make sure you have all the facts. And then I'll stand with you if that's a decision that you make. And I think sometimes I can feel the responsibility, but actually saying, maybe actually I need to kind of share that responsibility, or actually not take responsibility for it.
I was going to say, ultimately, it's not your responsibility.
It is a trustee.
You are serving the elders and in the legal framework, the trustees.
Absolutely right.
You shouldn't be carrying the weight of that responsibility.
Yeah.
You'll be alert to it.
Yeah.
But what you do with it, you then say, look, to your leader or something or other, you just need to know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We haven't got any money next month.
That's right.
That you won't get paid. But that'll make people But you shouldn't feel the weight of that responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
Unless you are also an elder, in which case you should.
Then you are.
But but
it's
ultimately
important to recognise that, isn't it? Yeah.
But it's easy for the leadership of the church to say, well, Gavin's so good at this, we'll let him get on with it.
Yeah.
And with that comes an implied level of responsibility that is beyond really why you're serving in this way.
And this is really helpful because, the next question someone's asked is how do we work through the tension of faith and finances, which is really what we are talking about here. Because these two questions do come together, isn't it? We have to have this recognition that times are tough for people. And so an awareness that actually we need to recognize that people are going to maybe find it more difficult to give in the same way that they could have done before. People's circumstances are changing with job losses or retirement, and all those things affect everything. So these things are good, and awareness is really, really important. But also, our guys here have also just done 3 weeks teaching on giving, and have kind of decided to say, actually, some people are looking and saying, that's brave, isn't it? Just why would you be talking about giving now at this point, But that tension goes on, doesn't it? Saying, actually, we want to talk about this because we want people to trust God, and we know God supplies all of our needs. And how do we remind people of that grace and that peace that can come because of all that Christ has done? He will meet our needs. And so how do we give generously, and how do we give even in generously in the midst of this context? So there's lots of this really is a big question at the minute, I think I'm getting to.
And I think there are times as well where it's not even necessarily about money.
Yeah.
What does money do? Money facilitates activity.
Yeah.
It may be that sometimes the activity can happen without the money. Because there's someone in the church who's gifted.
Yes.
We needn't employ this person to do that job or whatever.
Yes.
There are other ways. Yeah. I'm interested in that quote that I brought for Hudson Taylor's. It was God will supply all your needs. It wasn't God will give you all the money you need.
To build the ministry that you want. Yeah, that's right.
The supplying needs can be bringing people resources and so on to get things done, rather than saying it has to be money so you can buy that. In
absolutely
way.
Right. Yeah, and I think I used a word with a pastor the other day. I said, I love creative budgeting, and he said to me, that just sounds really dodgy, but it's not. It's actually saying, how can we steward that we've got? How can we be creative in finding ways that we can continue ministry or continue it in a slightly different way that actually recognizes that everything that we've been given here, we need to steward well, and we need to use it well. And I love the fact that you're putting together kind of a contingency pot for people that can, serve people in the church who are going to really face difficulties, and outside the church as well. And I definitely encourage churches to think about that as part of their budget. Really useful.
And the scripture says God loves a cheerful giver. And I think that's true of the church as well. That, if the church is generous.
Yes.
I mean, I've been in churches in Brighton for a long time, and we would, I'm not saying very frequently, but we would on occasion give to another church because the ministry they were doing, they needed money and we weren't doing it. And so let's get behind them and just honour them and bless them to get on and do it. So I think that if we can see church in that sort of way, that it's a kind of a facilitating community. And it may be that others come to us and say, look, you seem to have a lot of students who are very poor at the moment. Maybe we can give you £100 for each student or something.
That's absolutely right. But I think
that's thinking on the top of the head. That's not happening. It's,
if you're a student out there thinking, great, I might get £100 here. It's true. It's good. But I do think having conversations with trustees and elders, or PCCs and key leaders, getting the facts, finding out where we're at. You if you're a pastor listening to this, you might need to take a greater interest in the finances in this season than you might have had before. You may need to ask questions about things, in a slightly different way. You may not be able to bring your 100th idea to the table and see it work through because of the season that we're in. And actually, I think there's that working together, praying together, and saying, let's trust God together all on this point. We want to bring in a children's ministry worker. Let's trust God that the finances will come through for that. And we can stand and do that together. Where there are other things you say, well, actually, we can't feed the church this week like we might normally do, but we're going to draw that back. So some wisdom in just taking the time, I guess, which is the important thing here, isn't it? Take the time to review these things and to consider these things and make a plan from there.
And obviously to just look at what you're doing and say, well, are there things we needn't do, or we can do more efficiently, or in different ways, just being responsible in terms of the kind of the housekeeping of the church as well. And stewarding things well. Can I just say a word just more about having mentioned trustees, and I know that you've done a podcast on it, but just to say trustees need to be spiritual people. I have sadly seen too many cases where trustees have been appointed because of their gifting and worldly experience,
their business or something like
but they're not spiritual people. And they come from a different decision-making framework and can cause real mayhem in the church. So in appointing trustees, I urge any leaders who are listening to this podcast to start with the spiritual before the gifting.
And the character as well.
And character
exactly right.
and all that side.
I think that really does. It will help reduce the conflict, and in that sense, I think you're absolutely right. Take your time in choosing people and make it work. Really helpful. Anything else to add on that finance one?
I don't think so. No, one could obviously talk about some of the minutiae, but I think that's probably all I have to say.
So if you haven't got a church budget, then take time to spend some time reviewing. Get people together talking about this,
and alongside that as well, I'm surprised how often churches do not do a monthly management review of the finances, management accounts, you might call them. And just very simply, what has been the expenditure next door to a column of what was the budget? Both on the income and expenditure side, and be rigorous in reviewing that.
Absolutely right.
So that you know when something's gone wrong. It's much easier to change course as soon as you see you've gone slightly off course than when you realise you're miles off course and try to pull it back.
Absolutely right.
And you need to do that on a monthly basis.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on the podcast and serving me and the listeners. Just really thrilled to learn from you.
Well, it's a joy to be with you all again.
It's great.
This once, twice. Yeah.
And there's, we've said before, if you've got any emails that you'd love to questions or follow-up questions, please send them into questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We'd love to hear it. Nick, if you're listening, connect with Nigel, and we'd love to be able to serve you in that way. Please check out the website for more resources, and if there's anything that we can do to help support you in serving behind the scenes in your church, then please get in contact. We'd love to be able to bless you, pray for you, serve alongside you, and encourage you. So please do that. Well, until next time, we'll see you on the podcast. Thank you.